It's January 7th, 2024, and Ethan and I are 1 week into our big year, an unofficial contest to see as many species of birds as possible across the continental United States. We're also in the middle of an expected 10-inch snowstorm, so we may not add any new birds to our list today unless something surprising comes into our feeders, which can and does sometimes happen. It has been a fun week. Our initial plan had us spending the first couple weeks of the year in Maine getting our winter birds out of the way. So naturally, we've been to New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. So much for our well-laid plans. Plan deviation number 1 began on New Year's Eve, which we spent in Newburyport, Massachusetts, so we could be close to a long-eared owl that we had learned about from a birding friend. The owl was right where we heard it would be, but hidden behind a pine branch, in a hollow, made from pine branches. In other words, very hard to see. Fortunately, we had better views of an eastern screech owl. Incredibly, she was sleeping in a tree cavity in the middle of town, surrounded by beautiful sea captains' homes. We identified 44 species on day 1. These included dozens of waterfowl on Plum Island at the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, a handful of mute swans in Ipswich, Massachusetts, and a northern shoveler in Kittery as we crossed back into Maine. January 2nd was spent ticking off Maine winter birds, many of which will head north into Canada and the Arctic once spring arrives. The purple sandpiper is one of our favorite such birds, living on frosty, wave-tossed rocks under what we would consider terrible winter conditions. On January 3rd, we piled into our Subaru Outback, aptly named the Touring Edition, and headed to New Jersey on a quest for the red-flanked bluetail. This thrush-like bird is a Eurasian species, common from Great Britain to Taiwan, but extremely rare in North America. On the way to New Jersey, we stopped in East Haven, Connecticut to find a tufted duck, another European species that somehow got blown onto this side of the Atlantic. Check out the characteristic tuft or cowlick on the back of the duck's head. A few hours later, we arrived at the red-flanked bluetail stakeout. The homeowner where the bird has been hanging out allows crazy birders, a redundant term I might add, to stand in her side yard and wait for the bluetail to visit a holly bush and a dish of water, generally every 15 minutes or so. We watched it for an hour before rushing out to see a couple trumpeter swans in the next town over. The next morning, we began the long drive back to Maine, but made a brief stop at an industrial park to photograph a rare goose. We never found the goose, but were surprised when a black-headed gull, another European bird, landed about 50 feet away. During breeding season, the black-headed gull has a partial black hood that it loses during the winter. Check out this gull's beautiful red legs. As we drove north through Connecticut, we stopped to see a common gull in a Walmart parking lot. This was a life bird for both Ethan and me, our 4th lifer of the new year. As it was getting dark, another birder, who we met at the Walmart, took us to see a half-dozen tundra swans, barely visible on the far side of a lake. After 4 days, we had ticked off all 3 swan species normally found in the United States. We're keeping our fingers crossed that we'll find a rare whooping swan when we travel to Washington State in June. Ethan and I leave for Minnesota in a week to see rare owls and other boreal species that can be found in the Sac-Sim bog. But before then, we continue to work on our list of hard-to-find Maine birds. Yesterday, on a beach in York, we endured miserable cold and wind, working our way through an enormous flock of gulls, approximately 400, that was milling about on the sand. We sorted through the birds and found a single Iceland gull and a single glaucous gull, 2 more birds that now come off of our must-find Maine list. After Minnesota, we plan a final week in Maine before beginning our long road trip, highlighted by visits to Florida, Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, and parts in between. Right now, our bird total is 89 species. When we get to Florida and Texas, We may be able to add as many as 50 to 100 birds a day. Big years are a marathon, not a sprint.